Hello YouTube, it's Ryan here with Hobbies of Man once again, and today we're going to be doing another book review, which I don't really do too often on this channel because, well, I don't really end up reading novels too often due to the fact that it's just a lot more satisfying to read manga because of a variety of reasons, but mostly it's because I don't really have that much time to read, and the little bit of time I have feels a lot more satisfying with manga because when you read a manga, you get the story a lot faster, and it feels like you've done more because manga volumes are easier to read, right? So I don't know, maybe it's the wrong way of looking at reading, but it is the way that it makes me most happy to do, and it doesn't really matter. So today we're going to be looking at Tarnsman of Gor, book 1 in the Chronicles of Counter Earth. There you go. It has art by Forrest Vallejo on the cover, and it just looks so good, man. Like, look at that. And all of these characters and this actual painting actually looks and fits something that actually happens in the story. So it's quite good. I really like that. Because a lot of times when you have these really cool illustrations, they don't actually ever match anything that happens in the book. And the fact that Forrest Vallejo did a something that actually matches something in the book is really, really great. I like that a lot. This is written by John Norman, who is using a pen name. His actual name is John Lange, or Lange, I think. I don't know too much about the author, but I do think that there's some political situations where he comes off as the bad guy. I don't really have an opinion on them either way. I don't really know too much about them, but I do know that he is not necessarily the most upstanding person, right? But it doesn't really matter to me. I don't really care about the authors. I care about the books, right? So, yeah, this is published by Valentine under Del Rey. Del Rey science fiction right there. Here's what the back looks like, and here's the side. And the demographic here is adult for sure. I mean, I'm guessing when this came out, mostly teenagers and young adults were reading it, but by today's standards, this would definitely be an adult novel. And the genres here are sci-fi, sci-fantasy. This is a Sword and Planet, and maybe you can even call it a planetary romance type book. So basically, if you're around in 2012 and you saw the John Carter of Mars movie that Disney did, and then that they completely fell off, even though John Carter of Mars is a great story, you kind of know what planetary romance is. It's about a guy, usually someone from the past, who somehow ends up on a different planet, and he happens to gain some level of superpowers being on this different planet due to the change in gravity. They basically become more strong than the average person on these planets. And he becomes part of this culture, and eventually he meets a beautiful woman, which he falls in love with. And that's basically what happens in these planetary romance type books. And it is very much in the style of Edgar Rice Burroughs, who did Tarzan, but also did, most importantly, John Carter of Mars. It's also in the same vein as, Pellucidar, the Venus series. What's the other stuff? Callisto of something like that. I don't remember their names, but all of these fantasy stories that are actually more in a science fiction setting. So that's what that is. Sword and Planet, planetary romance. That's basically what it is. It's if Conan the Barbarian was a guy that ended up fighting some aliens, basically, right? And I think this actually did end up having adaptations at one point. I don't remember when this specifically came out, so let me check if it says here. This is from 1983. This is the 19th printing. And by this point, there had been 2 different movies for this story. And there was also the development of a comic book, but the comic book never came into fruition because of the situations around this author and what this book eventually kind of became, right? So it is what it is. I definitely think that this would do well as a comic book, and it would definitely fit with Dynamite and maybe even Image's kind of stylings, right? This is basically like Red Sonja and John Carter of Mars, and Dynamite does stuff with them all the time. So it would work for them to have Gor be part of it, at least based on the first book, and then branch out into their own stories from there. But I don't think it's possible because of the situation around this book. So let me stop pussyfooting around it. Let me tell you what's going on. So this book specifically doesn't have anything too egregious, but this world of Gor is actually a very barbaric, like caveman style society where the only thing that matters is strength, and women are basically non-existent in terms of political or power of any kind. Most of the female characters introduced in this story, except for two of them, actually there's only two female characters introduced in this story, but every other character that is mentioned to be female is also a slave. So there is definitely some problems with this story and the portrayal of female characters in this story, except for the two that I mentioned. But there's also kind of this emphasis on male domination and female submission. And of course, that's going to be problematic at the time that it was written and also now. However, this is fiction, and it's not really any different from a lot of things that are published nowadays, like Game of Thrones or Cushio's Dart, where the main character is literally a whore, or anything like that, right? Now, I don't have any emotional investment in this story beyond the first book, which I actually ended up liking a lot. So I don't really have a reason to get heated over this or anything like that. But I do know that later books actually devolve more into the kind of negative aspects that you can easily see from this first book becoming a problem. However, there's also a BDSM subculture around this story. They're called like Gorians or something like that. And I don't know too much about that either, but of course there's problems with that as well, because this is very much about men taking what they want from women, and it's problematic, of course, right? So, yeah, however, this book specifically doesn't really ever do that. There's only one scene that might approximate that, and in that one scene, we clearly see that the main character is fighting this because he doesn't think it's good, but he also kind of just notices that it's part of the culture here, and so eventually he probably will become one of these problematic characters himself. But in this first book, he is not. It's actually a very well written first book. I quite liked it. I thought it was really well done. And although I had a very negative, initial impression due to all of the research I had made, I had picked it up because I wanted something like John Carter of Mars with a different kind of style to it. And I think it manages to succeed in being like John Carter of Mars, having a different style, and actually just being an enjoyable read. But I probably won't read anything beyond this because at that point I do think it becomes problematic and negative, and I don't want to experience that myself. So yeah, the premise of this book specifically is that Taro Cobbett moves to the US on a camping trip. He's actually from England, and he ends up on Counter-Earth on Gor due to a weird situation where he finds an envelope made of metal, and then he gets transported by an Omni, like a UFO, into this Counter-Earth, which is a planet that orbits the sun directly parallel to the Earth. So you can't ever see it because it's blocked by the sun. And it kind of reminds me of like what the Goa'uld did to humans in Stargate. And it's really interesting. I actually liked it a lot. And then he becomes a heroic fantasy style adventure because it becomes a powerful character, right? So the plotline is good. It's simple. It's heroic fantasy. It's pulp style storytelling. It's just about a guy that is what's the word? In society, and he doesn't really like it. He feels conflicted. He feels trapped by his society. He ends up on a different planet, and he becomes freer by embracing this more barbaric lifestyle where all that matters is your strength and your personal convictions and your willpower to defend those convictions, right? And we get introduced to him as a character. We don't actually end up on Gor until about page 60, and most of the first 60 pages are just about him setting up who he is and why this adventure into this other world kind of matters to him, right? And so we learn about Gor, we learn about the reality of this place, and we get to develop the character as he trains with Torm, which is a scribe. He learns the language and he learns about the culture from him, and from this older character, this Viking-esque man called Older Tarl, like him, he has the same name, who teaches him how to fight. And eventually he gets him to ride a tarn, which is a giant bird, which is where the title of the book comes from. And eventually, we learn that he came to this world, and his father, who is also from this world, Matthew Cabot, actually is happy that he's here because he can finally interact with his son, but also can finally, do something he'd been wanting to do, but he didn't have the right person to do it. And Tarl just happens to be that right person. So it turns out that there's this other city called R, where they live in Koroba, that is run by this warlord. And this warlord is trying to put all of Gor under a single banner. And he's doing this in a very violent manner, and they don't want to submit to him. So they have to go and steal something from him to prove to the people of R and the people of all the other cities he's conquered that he is not a powerful character. And so they send Tarl to do this. And he sort of succeeds, but also fails at the same time. And through his failure, he actually ends up meeting a woman, Talina, who is the daughter of this warlord. And they start to fall in love after a lot of personal tension and plot development. And then we get to see a lot of battles where Tarl stops fighting for just himself or his father, but also for this woman that he loves. And it's very interesting. It's very similar to John Carter of Mars. And I quite liked it. I thought it was really well done. It is a bit dry, the way it's written, but everything else that happens in the book is really good. And I think it's dry because it's an old-style book. That's really all there is to it. And overall, it was really enjoyable. It was really good. It had all of the things that I was looking for, and it really managed to surprise me how good it was. So, yeah, in terms of characters, we have Tarl Cabot and Matthew Cabot, who are father and son, or son and father, actually, based on how I said them in order. Then we have Torm, who is from the scribe class. Older Tarl, who is a warrior, just the same as Tarl Cabot. Sana of Thentis, who is the first female slave that we get introduced to. And then she also ends up being a character that disappears and then becomes relevant again much later in the story. We have Kazrak, who is basically the equivalent of Tars Tarkas in John Carter of Mars. He is the secondary male character, the character that is friends and supportive of our main character. So he and Tarl are blood brothers. So Tarl beat him in a battle, and due to their society, he now respects him, and now they are friends, right? It's a very kind of anime-style relationship there. Then you have Marlenis, who is the evil warlord. We have Pakur, who is the leader of the Assassins caste, and he also wants to be a warlord after Marlenis has been outed because of what Tarl did. Talena, who is Marlenis' daughter. She's the daughter of the Ubar being a warlord. And then we have Mintar, who is a very important merchant, and he actually is kind of a linchpin in a lot of the things because he is the reason why so many things can happen, because he is just this very able kind of political power. So it's really interesting. I really liked it. In terms of world building, we learned that this is a counter-Earth. Like I said, it is directly parallel to Earth, and so you can never see it, even though it exists. And there's very many, what are they called? Hostings or gatherings or something. I can't remember exactly, but there have been many times in history where humans have been transported from Earth to Gor to aid in developing this world, right? And this is a very barbaric society. It's male-dominated. There are male slaves, but it's mostly female slaves that are employed. There are definitely also free women, but it's a much rare occurrence. And mostly it's just a male society with female slavery all over the place. This is a non-Earth animals. There's these things called Tarns, which are giant birds that everyone rides. There's these things called Tarlarlians, which are these walking lizards that you can see in the cover. There's two different types of them. There's the high ones and the low ones, and the low ones are basically like oxen, and the high ones are horses. And the Tarns are basically like fighter planes, right? And there's these other things called Lars, which are giant cat-like characters. And a lot of things here actually are very similar to Avatar, like the blue people, like the giant Smurfs. It's really interesting, and I really liked it. I thought it was really cool how, you could possibly see that that all of these modern movie makers took a lot of inspiration from these older sci-fi books, right? Because you can easily say that, you know, George Lucas read this book when he was a kid, and then he was like, bro, those slave girls, I gotta make one of them for Star Wars. And then you get Twi'leks and Slave Leia and all of these things, and Slave Leia's costume can be based on the way that art was depicted for John Carter of Mars, even though John Carter of Mars, everyone is naked in those books, you know, all of these types of things. It's really interesting. I really liked it. It's really interesting to see the development of the space opera from these planetary romance books. It's really cool. Yeah, very interesting world building. I thought it was really good. In terms of fan service, there's a lot of sexual subtext, but there's actually like one sexual situation in this book, and it's not really, like, it fades to black. So it's not really that racy of a book, but later books, I think, actually become a lot more problematic as they go on. But there's no actual sex scenes at all, and it's definitely not for kids because there's a lot of violence and stuff, but and there's a lot of sexual subtext. But, like, the book itself is not about that. It's about this guy's adventure in this crazy male-dominated world that he finds himself in, and that he doesn't really like, but he kind of understands. And it's a really weird kind of situation. And it's really good. I really liked how it was written. In terms of ratings, a 4 out of 5. I thought it was well written. It was actually interesting, and oddly, it doesn't really have too much of the stuff that I thought was going to happen in this book. You know, I thought it was going to be rife with sexual violence towards women. It was going to be very problematic and difficult to read, but it's actually a very well-written story in the vein of John Carter of Mars, and it's something I repeat over and over again. But if you ever find yourself being able to pick this book up, I definitely recommend you do so, and then decide on your own if you want to continue reading it or not. A lot of the things that you're going to find online about this book are going to be pretty negative, so be aware of that. But there's definitely a lot of people that enjoy them, and enjoy them so much that they made it their own kind of self-imposed lifestyle. So, you know, it is what it is. I don't have any, interest in the story beyond this first volume. I liked it, but it ended in such a way that I don't really need to read another one ever again, and I probably won't. I think this was a one-and-done story for me, and I'm going to move on to other things. I'm going to find other classic, old-school heroic fantasy pulp-style books to move on to, because there really isn't anything left for me to learn about this story, about this world. So yeah, that's all I have to say about this book. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please let me know down in the comments. Leave a like, subscribe, and all of the YouTube stuff. And thank you guys very much for watching. See you guys later.